All right, let's dive into this. Modern relationships. Oh boy. Family, friends, romance, you name it, all that good stuff. And, you sent over this really fascinating YouTube podcast script. And it really got me thinking, you know, are we really connecting these days with all the swipes and the likes and the follows? Or are we just, I don't know, kind of faking it?
That's a good question. I mean, it's really wild how much the whole relationship scene has changed, just in a couple of generations even.
Oh my gosh, totally. Like, can you imagine your grandparents trying to figure out Tinder?
It's like a whole different world.
Right. I mean, it's hilarious to think about, but this script makes a great point. It's like the way we connect has completely changed. I mean, back in the day, it was all about, meeting people through your family or your neighborhood or like joining a bowling league, real life stuff.
Exactly. It was a slower pace, for sure. Fewer options. And people really focused on that long-term commitment thing. I mean, partly because, well, there wasn't a whole new batch of potential partners popping up every 5 seconds like there is now, right?
Oh, for sure. And now it's all bam, instant gratification, algorithms doing their thing, swipe, swipe, swipe. It's like we're, I don't know, shopping for a partner instead of actually building a connection.
It's like we're looking for the best deal online.
Right.
Yeah.
And while that could be fun, like for those first dates and all, I mean, this script brings up a really good point, Are we trading depth for breadth? Like, are we sacrificing those really meaningful connections just because we have so many options?
That's a really important question, and the script dives right into it, Because with all these options, it's so easy to just keep looking for something better, something shinier, instead of putting in the work to actually grow a real relationship.
I totally get that. It's like this constant chase, even when what you have is already pretty great.
Yeah.
But what really struck me in this script, honestly, was the whole communication thing. Or, well, should I say the lack of communication?
Yeah. It's kind of ironic, right? We have like a zillion ways to connect instantly, but it often feels like we're actually talking less, or at least not communicating as well.
It's so true. Like, the script uses this funny example, arguing over text. Just one word. Hey. And suddenly it means a million different things, from casual to, like, totally passive-aggressive.
No, yeah, absolutely. I've been there. It's like you can't hear the other person's tone or see their face, so you just fill in the blanks with your own anxieties.
Exactly.
I
What's the
feel.
worst? And that's why the script really emphasizes active listening, which, let's be honest, is a bit of a lost art these days. It's like really tuning in to what the other person is saying, not just their words, but like their body language, their tone, everything. It's about understanding their message, not just hearing the sounds.
You got it. It's like we need to become these like relationship detectives, right? We need to look for those little clues that tell us what someone really means beyond just the surface level.
Exactly. And the script even suggests this technique that I thought was really cool. Like when you're talking to someone, try reflecting back what you hear, to make sure you're both on the same page. It sounds simple, but I bet it makes a big difference in making the other person feel heard and understood.
It does. It takes the pressure off of them to keep explaining themselves and reassures them that you're really trying to get it.
Right. And when you feel like that, like someone's really listening, don't you think you're more likely to open up and share your real thoughts and feelings?
Yes, absolutely. It creates that sense of safety and trust that's so important for any kind of close connection. And that brings us to another biggie that the script highlights: boundaries. And especially in this digital age, they're super important.
Boundaries, yeah. That line between being open and connected versus like totally overwhelmed and drained. And I like how the script points out it's not selfish to have boundaries. Actually, it's self-respect. And respect for the other person, too. It's all about knowing your limits and being clear about them.
It's about saying, hey, I care about you, I want to be there for you, but I also need to take care of myself. Because if you don't, you're not going to be much good to anyone.
Right. It's like if you're constantly giving, giving, giving without taking care of yourself, you're going to burn out.
Yeah.
And then everybody loses. The script uses this great analogy, like you can't pour from an empty cup.
Right. It's so true. We often feel like we have to be on all the time, especially in this always connected world. But taking time for yourself, it's not selfish, it's essential. I mean, think about it. Have you ever felt totally burnt out in a relationship because you're giving too much and not getting enough back?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
It's so easy to fall into that trap, especially when you care about someone a lot.
Yeah.
But okay, so we've talked about communication, boundaries, self-care. But we can't talk about modern relationships without talking about, well, the elephant in the room, The one that's always liking our photos, commenting on our posts, and telling us what a perfect relationship should look like.
Social media, right.
Bingo! And you know what? This script doesn't hold back. It calls out all the ways social media can mess with our heads, especially when it comes to relationships.
It's like a funhouse mirror sometimes, it distorts things, makes us question what's real, what's normal. It's tough.
Totally. It's like we're bombarded with these picture-perfect couples. They're always on vacation, always smiling, always in love. And we forget. It's just a snapshot.
Yeah.
A carefully chosen moment. It's not the whole story.
It's the highlight reel, not the behind the scenes, right?
Exactly. And I love how the script uses those funny examples, those staged couple photos. They're like gazing lovingly into each other's eyes while holding these perfectly frothy lattes against some amazing backdrop. It's a good reminder that social media isn't always real life.
It's easy to get caught up in the comparison game, though, isn't it? We see these seemingly perfect relationships online, and we start to feel like we're falling short, even if things are actually pretty good in our own offline world.
Oh, for sure. It's so easy to fall into that trap. I mean, it makes you wonder, how do we navigate this whole social media thing in a way that actually helps our relationships instead of hurting them?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's something we'll definitely explore more as we keep going with this deep dive. But, before we move on, I think it's worth taking a moment to really reflect on what we've talked about so far. We've covered a lot of ground, how the very nature of connecting has shifted, how technology has both helped and complicated things, and how this constant social media presence can shape how we see relationships. It's a lot to process.
Totally. And I think it's important to think about how all of this is playing out in our own lives. You know, like, do you find it easier or harder to make real connections these days? And how is technology impacting your relationships? Is it helping or hurting? It's worth asking ourselves these questions.
I think so too, because once we start to understand the forces at play, we can start to make more conscious choices about how we navigate them. We can take back some control.
Absolutely. And that's what it's all about, right? Finding those
Uh-huh.
ways to connect, to build meaningful relationships, even in this crazy, constantly connected world. It's a challenge for sure, but it's definitely possible. And I think that's what makes this whole conversation so fascinating.
I agree. It's a journey, not a destination, right? We're all figuring it out as we go.
Right on. Well, let's keep going with this deep dive. I'm really curious to see what else this script has to say.
Me too. Let's dive back in. It's kind of cool to think about how the whole idea of family has changed, like along with all these changes in how we connect and everything.
Yeah, for sure. Like the script even talks about that. It's not just your blood relatives anymore, right? It's blended families, chosen families, all kinds of setups.
What's interesting is that it shows how much we need connection. Like, it
Mm.
goes way beyond just romantic stuff. We all want those deep bonds, and that support system, whether it's family or people we choose to be close to.
Totally. That really hit home for me. I've seen it firsthand. Friends who are closer to their chosen family than their biological one. And those bonds, they're just as strong, sometimes even stronger, I think.
Yeah, it's like that human need to belong, right? To find your tribe, those people who really get you. And the script actually says that technology might even make it easier to create those chosen families because you're not limited by like where you live or who you happen to know in your neighborhood.
That's a good point. So in a way, tech is kind of expanding the definition of family, right? Giving us more ways to find those connections that are so important to us.
Yeah, it's weird, right? Like sometimes technology makes us feel isolated, but it can also open up all these new possibilities for connection that wouldn't have been there before. It's a bit of a paradox.
It really is. But speaking of connection, this script doesn't shy away from, romantic relationships in this digital age,
Mhm.
all that fun stuff.
Ah, yes. Love, dating, algorithms, the whole shebang.
Exactly. And the script talks about this thing, this paradox of choice. Like, online dating gives us all these options more than ever before, which sounds awesome, right?
Mhm.
But it can also be totally overwhelming.
You're right. It's easy to get lost in the sea of faces and profiles. It can feel like you're always looking for that, I don't know, perfect person, that perfect match. And you end up swiping and swiping and swiping like you're shopping for a new pair of shoes or something.
Exactly. Instead of really truly connecting with someone.
Like, it's almost like you're afraid to commit because what if there's someone better out there, right? What
Mhm.
if you miss out?
Right. And the script even uses this metaphor. It's like a buffet. You have so many choices. You try a little bit of everything, but you never really savor anything fully. You're just too busy looking for the next best thing. And that's when that whole fear of missing out thing kicks in. the FOMO. You're constantly worried that you're going to miss that perfect match, even though, honestly, who knows if it even exists.
Totally. It can be a real struggle. And the script says that the key to breaking free from this whole paradox of choice thing is to be more intentional. Like, really think about what you're doing and why.
Okay, but what does that actually look like, in real life? Like, how do you become more intentional with dating?
Well, I think it starts with, being honest with yourself. Like, what are you really looking for in a partner? What are your non-negotiables? It's about looking beyond the superficial stuff, the profile pictures and the funny bios.
So it's not just about being swept away by a cute photo or a witty bio. It's about, like, digging deeper.
Right.
Ask yourself, is this person actually compatible with me? Do we share similar values? Do we want the same things in life? Those big questions.
Exactly. And it's also about being more aware of, your online dating habits. It's easy to get caught up in the game, but the script encourages us to slow down, be more picky, focus on quality over quantity.
I like that. It's like instead of scarfing down fast food, you're taking the time to prepare a home-cooked meal.
Hmm.
It might take more effort, but the results are so much more satisfying.
That's a great way to put it. And this brings us back to communication, which the script says is absolutely crucial for any romantic relationship, maybe even more so now with all the digital distractions.
Yeah, because it's so easy to hide behind our screens,
Right.
to just like present a perfect version of ourselves and avoid those tough conversations that are actually important for building intimacy.
Oh, for sure. And the script is clear, open, honest, vulnerable communication. That's the foundation of any strong romantic relationship.
Mhm.
It's about being able to express your needs and desires, listen with empathy, and work through disagreements in a healthy way. All that good stuff.
But that's easier said than done, right? Especially when we're constantly being told what a perfect relationship should look like, thanks to social media and those cheesy rom-coms.
Yeah, all those external influences, they can really mess with our heads. But this script makes a good point. Every relationship is unique. There's no one size fits all. What works for one couple might be a disaster for another. It's about finding what works for you.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But how do you find that balance, Being open and vulnerable, but also setting boundaries to protect yourself.
Hmm.
It's a tricky thing.
I think the script's right. It starts with self-awareness. Understanding your own needs, your triggers, how you communicate, that's essential.
It's like taking a look at your own emotional baggage,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Figuring out what you're bringing to the table and how that might be affecting the relationship.
Totally. And it takes honesty, being real with yourself about your strengths and weaknesses, and being open to learning and growing. Because nobody's perfect.
So
Yeah.
self-awareness is key, but then there's the whole, actually communicating your needs and boundaries thing. We talked about active listening, using I statements, all that. But any other tips for communicating effectively, especially when it's a tough conversation?
Well, the script actually talks a lot about nonverbal communication. It's not just what you say, but how you say it. Your body language, tone of voice, even eye contact, all that plays a role.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I've been in those situations where, like, someone's words are saying one thing, but their body language is telling a whole different story. It's like, okay, who do I believe here?
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to be aware of both, your own nonverbal cues and the other person's. It can make a huge difference in how your message is received.
So, like, if you're having a serious conversation with your partner, leaning in, making eye contact, maybe using a softer tone of voice, that can help them feel more heard and understood, even if you don't agree on everything.
Exactly. It shows that you care, that you're really trying to connect.
Mm.
On the other hand, if you're constantly checking your phone or avoiding eye contact, it sends the message that you're not really present, even if you're saying all the right things.
It's like saying, I'm here, but not really, which can be pretty hurtful, even if you don't mean it that way.
Oh, it can. So yeah, being aware of our nonverbal communication, it's just as important as choosing our words carefully. It's about creating that sense of trust and safety, that allows for real connection.
Right, that makes sense. And speaking of connection, the script talks about just like being present,
Yeah.
putting down your phone, being in the moment, having those real life interactions that build intimacy and shared experiences.
That can be tough these days, right? With all the distractions and everything. But the script makes a good point. Making time for quality time, whether it's with your partner, your friends, your family, that's one of the best things you can do for your relationships.
And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. Dinner together, a walk in the park, a game night, just something that gets you off your phones and connecting with each other.
Exactly. Creating those memories, strengthening those bonds, and reminding yourself why these people are important to you.
And I think it's also about expressing gratitude for those relationships. The script mentions it, but I think it's worth repeating because it's so easy to take the people in our lives for granted. Just get busy and forget how much they mean to us.
It's true. We get caught up in the daily grind and forget to appreciate the good stuff. The little things that bring us joy and make us feel loved.
So how do we, like, practice more gratitude in our relationships? What does that actually look like?
Well, it can be as simple as saying thank you more often or expressing appreciation for specific things, that your loved ones do for you, or writing a note telling them how much they mean to you. It's just about making that effort to acknowledge the good things, big or small.
And I think it's also about, celebrating each other's successes, being that cheerleader, that supportive friend or partner, really wanting to see the other person thrive. I think that's a big part of it too.
That's so important because at the end of the day, real connection comes from caring, wanting the best for the other person, even if it means making sacrifices or stepping outside your comfort zone. That's what it's all about.
Because relationships are about showing up, right? Through thick and thin, being that consistent source of love and support, even when things get messy or complicated.
That's beautifully said. And I think that's a perfect transition to the last part of our deep dive, because we're going to move from talking about all this to actually doing something about it.
Right, like putting all this wisdom into action. I like it.
Okay, so in the next part, we're going to explore some practical strategies for building stronger, more fulfilling relationships in all areas of our lives. Get ready for some action steps.
All right, so we've talked about a lot, how families are changing, that whole online dating paradox of choice thing. A lot to unpack there. But let's get down to brass tacks. What can we actually do to build stronger, more fulfilling relationships? Any kind of relationship, really.
Well, we've hit on some of the biggies already. Communication, boundaries, self-care. But this script, it really highlights one thing that's super important for making all that work. Self-awareness. Like really knowing yourself.
Right. It's like if you don't know what you need, what your triggers are, how you communicate, how can you expect anyone else to figure it out?
Exactly. It's like trying to build a house without a blueprint. Self-awareness is that blueprint. It helps you understand what you bring to the table, how you might be contributing to, well, certain patterns, the good and the bad.
Oh, yeah. Like, let's say you're always getting into fights with your partner because you feel like they're not listening. Maybe the first step isn't blaming them, but looking at yourself. How are you communicating? Are you being clear? Are you picking the right time to talk?
Exactly. And the script makes a good point. Self-awareness isn't about being perfect, it's about being honest. Knowing your strengths, but also those not so great parts of yourself, and being open to learning and growing.
Right. Because let's be real, we all have some baggage, right? Past relationships, family stuff, even our own little quirks. They can all impact how we interact with people. But instead of seeing those things as like flaws, maybe we can see them as opportunities to grow.
I like that. It's not about being fixed, it's about being aware and making choices that align with the kind of relationships you want to build.
Okay, so self-awareness is huge. But then there's that whole communication piece. We talked about listening, using I statements, all that good stuff. But are there any other tips for communicating well, especially when it's, a tough conversation?
Well, the script really emphasizes something we haven't talked about much: nonverbal communication. It's not just the words you say, it's your body language, your tone, even eye contact. It all matters.
Oh, yeah, I've totally been in situations where it's like someone's saying one thing, but their body language is screaming something totally different. It's so confusing.
Right. And that's why it's so important to be mindful of your own nonverbals and pay attention to other people's.
So, like, if you're having a serious talk with your partner, maybe leaning in, making eye contact, using a softer tone, that can help them feel heard, even if you're disagreeing.
Exactly. It shows you care, you're really trying to understand. But if you're on your phone or not making eye contact, it sends the opposite message. Like you're not really present, even if you're saying all the right things.
It's like saying, I'm here, but I'm not really here. Ouch.
It can be hurtful, even if it's not intentional. So yeah, paying attention to nonverbals, it's just as important as the words we choose. It's all part of creating that feeling of safety and trust.
That makes sense. So we've talked about communication, but the script also talks about just being present, right?
Yeah.
Like actually putting down our phones and having those real-life moments that build connections, those shared experiences.
And that can be hard these days. There are so many distractions. But this script really emphasizes making time for quality time. Whether it's with your partner, your friends, your family, it's crucial.
And it doesn't have to be like this huge planned out thing. Just dinner, a walk in the park, a game night, anything that gets you connecting, really connecting.
It's all building those memories, strengthening those bonds, and remembering why these people are so important in your life.
And I think it's also about saying thank you, like really expressing gratitude for those relationships. It's so easy to get caught up in life and forget to do that.
It is. We forget to appreciate the good stuff, those little things that bring us joy and make us feel loved.
So any tips for practicing more gratitude in relationships?
It's simpler than you think. Saying thank you more often, telling people you appreciate them, for specific things they do, even writing a little note telling them how much they mean to you. Just acknowledging the good things.
And I think it's also about celebrating each other, right? Like being a cheerleader for your partner, your friends, your family, wanting to see them succeed and being there to support them.
That's so important because real connection, it comes from that place of caring, wanting the best for someone, even if it means, making sacrifices or stepping outside your comfort zone.
Because at the end of the day, relationships are about showing up through the good times and the bad, being there for each other, that consistent source of love and support.
Beautifully said. And I think that's a perfect way to wrap up this deep dive. You've given us so much to think about, when it comes to navigating relationships in this crazy modern world.
We've covered a lot, that's for sure, the challenges, the opportunities, but most importantly, the things we can actually do to build stronger, more meaningful relationships, no matter what kind of relationship we're talking about.
And remember, this whole relationship thing, it's a journey. It takes effort, it takes being intentional, but it's so worth it.
It is, because those strong relationships, those are the things that make life rich and meaningful. So go out there, connect, communicate, appreciate, and keep building those bonds that make life so great.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.